Hi again, Adrian from the Sofeast team here, and Renault's with me too.
Hi Adrian, is everything all right?
Good, thank you. Not enjoying the winter up here in Northern Europe, obviously. It's pretty cold and grey and wet, as I was talking to you off air about. But hey, that's the way it is. You got to take with the rough with the smooth. In the summer, it's pretty nice. So
Right.
I guess I'll take it. And Hong Kong as well. I'm sure it's a little bit more stable and nicer temperatures.
Yeah, nicer temperatures for sure. Yeah, it's the best time of the year.
Yeah,
November, December. Yeah,
absolutely. And all the Chinese New Year stuff should be coming up quite soon as well. So you get all the fun of Christmas and then followed really quickly with Chinese New Year.
Yeah, very quick this time. Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to be a bit blurred together. Let's see.
Yeah, which by the way, we did a podcast episode about Chinese New Year and how to prepare for it quite recently. So if you're wondering how that might impact your business, just check that out. Go back a few episodes and check it out. So yeah, today's topic is I wanted to get an idea of what makes up the cost of these inspections and how can we potentially reduce costs if we need to. Because if you do order inspections, you could do a lot or you could only do a few. So the costs, your QC inspection costs can vary quite a bit. So as somebody that might want to order them, you might be thinking, well, how do I know what makes up these costs and how they get to the level they get to? So that's where we're going with this today, Renault.
Right. Well, there's basically two responses to that. First is it depends a lot about your product and your orders and things like that, things due to you and how your products are designed and so on, and what kind of supplier you work with, right? And then there's the inspection process itself. And there's a number of little tweaks that you might do that could cost quite a bit. But then the question sometimes is it a good trade-off to reduce inspections and increase the risk and maybe run the risk of not detecting a very big problem that's going to be very expensive, right? But the first answer is really depends on things from your side, right? On the buyer side, one element of this is the product. Maybe another element of that is the order, how it's spread out in different models and so on. So the product itself, well, if it is a simple product and it comes out, big parts of it just come out of a mold, for example, well, you're not going to be too afraid of, let's say, dimensional variation or even aesthetic variations. If it all comes out of a mold, if they do the setup properly at the beginning, well, probably the whole run will be okay, right? Probably, right? The more features a product has, obviously, the more things can go wrong, right? So this is really, really a big thing. But let's say you already design your product and so on, or it's supplier design product, you just distribute. Okay, you don't really have a choice here. All right. Next thing is maybe, do you know what is really important on your product? So different kinds of buyers have different requirements. Maybe you buy like class 3 medical devices like heart implant or something like that. Well, it's just got to function all the time, right? So there's a very heavy emphasis on function and reliability, right? But aesthetics for aesthetics' sake, who cares, right? Whereas if you buy at the other extreme, I don't know, a giveaway T-shirt, it's just going to be worn maybe once, and then who cares? Maybe people are going to, put it on when they do gardening until they throw it away, right? Well, in that case, what's really important is, hey, the logos got to be the right color and the right size and placed at the right in the right position. And basically people really don't care much about all the rest. Okay. So what is actually important for your product? You got to know about that, right? We have clients who document a few things, send that to us, and then, after an inspection, they ask, "Oh, but wait a minute, there's this problem, but how come you didn't tell us?" And we're like, "We have no clue that's a problem for you, because for some other clients, it's not a problem at all." So people very often lack the they need to take a few steps back. They lack perspective about what's really important on their product and what might not be considered very important by the manufacturer or by an inspector who really you never met and you never explained things to, and so on. So you get to explain these things. You get to emphasize that. Okay, so that's really very, very important. And if you don't know what to check, well, then the inspector is going to check everything by default, right? So let's take the example of a bike. Well, a bike's a bike. You might think, well, it's not that complicated, but you can pick, 300 things to check on a bike. The way this works and that works, and the dimension of this and the way this fits into that, and so on and so forth. You can really make a list of 300 checkpoints often. All right. But is it worth sending an inspector and paying, 3 days of work because you want them to check 300 checkpoints on a number of samples? Probably not. So you need to think, what's the right trade-off here? Okay, these things are die cast and they're all the same. So maybe we ask them to check just one piece. And this one is affixed manually, assembled manually. So we need to check more, maybe for gaps or any, other potential defects and so on. You need to think about that, and you need to clarify what the inspector should pay more attention to, and really what should be totally ignored during the inspection, right? Because otherwise somebody else is going to make that call. Again, what's important in your product more than the inspector, and probably also more than the manufacturer. Okay, so what we're talking about, the drivers of inspection costs on the buyer's side. Another one is the ordering patterns. So if you buy one product, one model in one color, and you buy 20,000 pieces at a time, well, the cost of inspection not going to be very high. But if you place orders of 2,000 pieces across a dozen SKUs, with different sizes and different colors and maybe different materials and so on, hey, somebody's going to have to check all these different models, and somebody's going to have to check the labeling and the packing and all the things that vary based on all these variations of the product. Right? So this would directly lead to a lot more time to inspect the same quantity of products, right? Yeah. Now, it's relatively common to maybe skip some of the colors or some of the SKUs, and to pick some a little bit at random, or maybe at least one in leather, and at least one in PU, and at least one with that little hat and this and that. So you kind of try to cover each kind of product, including the most complex one, let's say. So inspectors don't have to check every variation, but still it does add, a lot of extra work. Plus also, it makes everything longer. In inspection, people have to count things in the warehouse maybe, or on the production line, and spend more time also picking the different models. All of that really multiplies the time of the inspection. Okay. And the last thing that's under the buyer's control is really the choice of the manufacturing facilities and how good they are. right? I guess I don't really need to expand on that, but it should be pretty obvious that a really good manufacturer doing the assembly and then some really good manufacturers picked for example, the display, the battery, the PCBA, all the critical components or whatever components or materials are critical to you. Well, that would tend to be much safer, right, than the mom and pop little workshop, some kind of garage, putting things together and closing cartons and shipping them to you, right? There's a very big difference. So all of that is on the buyer side, right? And then second topic that I think most people have in mind when they think inspection cost is the inspection process itself, right? So do you check 100% of the products? Typically, people don't do that, except pilot run pre-series of certain types of products or like jewelry, expensive, like watches and things like that. Vehicles, if you order cars or buses, probably want to have someone inspect 100% of them. It doesn't mean check them on 100% of the checkpoints and so on, but have a look at every single one of them, right? But for most consumer goods, not very pricey, makes more sense to do random inspection. And there are some statistics about that and so on. So we wrote about the ISO 2859-1, which is the most common one that people tend to use. Not necessarily the best, but the one that also Asian suppliers are most used to, and the AQL limits and what it means and so on. And I guess we can link to that from in the show notes. So there is really sort of a science to how to pick random samples at random and then how to draw a conclusion about the entire population, right? Another big question is, should you check every single batch as the buyer, or should you do skip lot inspections? So if you work with a manufacturer, stable factory, stable manufacturing process, stable product, and you get some good performance, a track record of past inspections, then you might want to skip some of the inspections. Now, do you tell the manufacturer in advance which one will take place or not take place? Maybe not. Maybe you want to keep an element of surprise, or maybe you want to do inspections on the big orders only, or special promotion with special packaging, whenever there's something special. That's up to you. There's different ways to do that, right? Oh, another one, I should mention it first, sorry, is should you do inspections close to the source, like in the factory that makes, that does the work, or should you do it as an incoming inspection in your own warehouse or facility or maybe your own factory, right? So, like for example, at Agilian, okay, we do some assembly of some products in Dongguan, and then we have some suppliers, let's say maybe they're in Shenzhen, and ship to us. So we have a contract with them, Chinese company to Chinese company. Very often we haven't paid them in full, so we still have some leverage. If there are some problems, we call them and we say, hey, there's a big problem, come and have a look. And we block everything, and then maybe they take it back, they rework it, or they reproduce or something. In many cases, especially if it's repeat business and suppliers that we have vetted and everything, fine, no need to send inspectors to their place. Now, take the opposite case. Maybe you're developing a pretty complex product, and you're going to get it in a warehouse in Nevada in the US. Well, do you wait until the products get into your warehouse? Probably not. And actually, you might even want to get the products, not just the finished products inspected, but also some of the critical components. Maybe you want to do an inspection on maybe the display and the PCBA, at least the first time, right? So you go not only to your tier 1 supplier, but also to tier 2 suppliers, manufacturing places, if it's not all in-house at the final manufacturing place. So that's a big one, because if you have people doing incoming QC, maybe one person can do a lot of work, and but if you send people to different factories in China, in India, and so on, well, that might be a much higher budget, right? Okay, so we mentioned that. We mentioned random sampling versus 100% check. We mentioned regularly every batch versus skip lot. When it comes to random sampling, there's some knobs you can turn, sort of, some settings you can adjust. In theory, you work with good suppliers that have a good track record. You go maybe to different severity, reduce severity, or if they're bad, maybe tighten severity. And then if you decide that maybe the product risk is not very high, then you have levels, level 1, 2, 3, or even special levels for smaller sampling. The typical example is if you buy ammunitions, cartridges, maybe for guns. Well, if you have to shoot the cartridge every time to see if it's good, you're going to waste a lot of cartridges, maybe, and maybe that's expensive. So you might go with a special level to go to check a smaller proportion of the whole batch quantity, right? That's typical for destructive tests, also for very time-consuming tests. Like, for example, you buy an Android smartphone in Shenzhen, and you say, well, we have to do a full function check. And then the inspector's going to say, wait a minute, like, I might have a week of work to go through every single function. Okay, sorry. So you need to check this in depth. Okay, well, that's already a lot of time. So maybe I can do it only on 5 or 10 pieces at the same time, but that's it. Not going to be able to do it on 100 pieces, let's say, right? So that's very time consuming. So these are sort of little knobs, severity, the level, including for each checkpoint, right? As I mentioned, some of them may be destructive, for example. So you do these checkpoints on a smaller sampling, while maybe you follow general level 2, which is the one generally recommended for visual check, right? So you do a visual check, look for defects. You have, ceramic mugs, and then you look at them for black points, black dots, and things like that, and you classify them and everything. But that's just a quick visual check for visual defects. Or if you have, again, a smartphone, you might turn it on and get it to, play a melody or something. That's a very quick, basic function test. Or maybe you put a SIM card inside, you turn it on, and then you see if you can connect, and you get a quick call, right? That could be a very quick test. And then if it doesn't work, boom, that's, counted as a defect, right? I also talked about the number of checkpoints, about, let's say, the bike. You could have 250 or 300 checkpoints on a bike, but do you really need to check 300 checkpoints on a bike? As long as you look at them, it looks good, you do a little ride, it feels good, it breaks nicely, you compare it with a proof sample, sort of visually everything looks fine. Well, maybe a dozen checkpoints, usually that's too few. But for a very good supplier, maybe a dozen checkpoints is enough, if there's a very good track record. So the number of checkpoints is quite important. And then maybe the last thing I want to mention here is that the inspection process is a process, and doing some engineering work makes it better and faster, right? Process improvement also applies here. So, for example, when I was doing some work in the auto industry, it was quite common to see some nice go-no-go gauges and checking fixtures and things like that. So basically, when the product is developed to satisfy the PPAP, so it's like a list of requirements from the buyer side, right? They would the suppliers of the parts of the components that go in a car would not only, of course, design the parts, make prototypes, do some performance testing and things like that. So pretty basic. They will also define how it's going to be tested, how to make sure it's, the measurement system is good and so on. And one of the things that they would do is they would actually validate the fact that, it can be checked relatively fast and there's not many false positives or false negatives. And they would, often the buyer would push them, or the quality, like supplier quality engineers would push them to prepare some tooling, often relatively simple. For example, you have a checking fixture to confirm that the part is dimensionally correct. Well, you have the part, put it in the fixture, you snap a few things, and you see if it fits nicely, right? Or if something is loose or too tight or whatever. It's a very quick dimensional check. Now, it's pass or no pass, right? You don't collect a lot of data, but at least if something is no good, it would be put aside, it would be detected, right? And there's all kinds of smart gauges and things. Obviously, on a podcast, I can't really show any example, but there's all kinds of things can be done. But this takes some engineering, right? And for a lot of products, people ask us sometimes, well, whatever, the clip has to have this like force, but not too much, not too little, and things like that. And they say, well, we don't even know how to test that. So they get a little bit nervous and they think, oh, I should be there, but obviously these days it's not easy for buyers to fly to China. And they wonder, how to communicate that to the manufacturer, how to set a standard, and how to make sure the inspectors will know what my standard is. But very often you're not the first one to have this this kind of headache. And with a little bit of search, a few hours searching for some testing and measuring devices, and a little bit of thinking, often we can find some devices, and very often it's not that expensive, So you buy the fixture to keep the part, and you buy the measuring device. You pay for calibration, and might cost $300, $400 or something. But then you have a repeatable, objective way of confirming that a part is within standard or not within standard. I mean, this is gold on sometimes a very critical issue. And people very often don't think about that. And then they ask us to do this kind of test and that kind of test, and you take a caliper like this and you try to blah, 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 and it takes time. It takes a lot of time. But you would save a lot of time actually to get the right measurement instrument or gauge or whatever prepared, get it in place in production. The manufacturer should use it in their own testing and inspection. And then you have an inspector coming in and do the checks, and it should take much less time, right? Maybe you don't need to check as many pieces because you kind of trust the manufacturer to have done it already. And then you should have one also in your facility to double check samples that are sent to you and do your own little incoming quality control, of course, right? But that's also something people overlook. But it is a process, and the inspection process can be improved. So there you go.
Great. This really reminds me of a topic that I spoke with Andrew about recently, the pay me now or pay me later. I mean, doing inspections and spending money on inspections, even if that amount seems to increase and it's more than perhaps you initially thought, it's kind of a classic case of pay me now rather than, pay a lot to put right quality issues that could have been avoided.
Oh, yeah. No, first, pay now to pick a good supplier that has a good quality system and so on, audit them and so on. Pay now to to work on the design of the product, review it, think of potential issues and so on, do some testing, pay now to get some close follow-up during the development and the pilot runs and the first batch production and so on, to detect the issues and fix them early. And then when you're in mass production, pay now to have a little bit of monitoring of what's going on. Because if you don't pay now at these stages, wow, you might have to pay a lot. Some of our clients just had to completely close because they had such big issues that were so expensive, really blew up in their faces. Deliver maybe to a key customer, and then everything went back to them. I mean, it's pay now or pay later, if you can. So talk about safety recalls. Yeah, that has driven more than one company out of business. So,
absolutely. Yeah, Andrew said himself he worked for a business a long time ago. That it had damaging reviews from customers that nearly sent it under.
Right.
Yeah, because it only takes a second to leave a bad review, but how do you clear up that mess when it lasts forever?
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Andrew's episode was spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, I hope that's given everybody listening an insight into how inspections are kind of structured in terms of the process, but also how the cost is built. It's impossible to just give a dollar cost, right? We can't say, well, inspections are going to cost $1,000 or whatever, right? Because it's going to vary depending on your needs and your project. But at least, Renaud, I think you've given a good insight into the different activities and checks that can go into somebody's inspection. I don't know, should I say portfolio plan? Something like this. And obviously those are going to affect the cost, and some tips on, how you might be able to reduce. It's all good stuff. If you're listening and you're wondering how to improve your inspections or the sorts of inspections that you should or could be doing, and you'd like some advice, get in touch.
Yeah, right. Thanks. Good one.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.